The town of Dry Creek lay hidden in a shallow valley, a cluster of wooden shacks and a single main street that seemed to bake endlessly beneath the unforgiving western sun. Its people were hardened by drought, dust, and lawlessness, their faces carved with suspicion and weariness, as if trust itself had dried up along with the river that once gave the town life. In such a place, whispers held more weight than facts, and fear spread faster than the prairie winds. It was here, in this tense and bitter atmosphere, that the story of a boy barely 17 years old would unfold, a boy who had come to Dry Creek seeking work, nothing more than the chance to earn a living wage with his two hands. His arrival was quiet, unnoticed at first, yet within weeks his name would be spat with venom, his fate sealed not by evidence, but by the collective rage of a town eager to blame someone, anyone, for the shadows lurking in their midst. The boy's crime, if it could even be called one, was nothing more than being in the wrong place at the wrong time. A rancher's cattle had gone missing, and the air was thick with rumors of rustlers. Men gathered in the saloon, their voices low and dangerous, fueled by cheap whiskey and the kind of restless anger that seeks an outlet. Eyes turned to the newcomer, young, unfamiliar, with no family ties to shield him from suspicion. His quiet demeanor and thin frame were mistaken for deceit, his youth confused with guilt. In a place where justice was swift and often cruel, suspicion alone was enough to spark violence. By the time the sheriff reluctantly placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, the crowd had already made up its mind. Dry Creek was a tinderbox waiting for a match, and the boy was the spark they needed. The trial, if one could call it that, was nothing more than a formality, a thin veil draped over what was already decided. The townsfolk packed into the dusty courthouse, their faces tight with anticipation, the air heavy with heat and vengeance. The boy stood trembling, his hat clutched to his chest, his eyes darting to the door as if still hoping someone, anyone, might step in to defend him. But no one did. He had no lawyer, no family, and no allies in Dry Creek. The sheriff sat uneasily in his chair, shifting his gaze away as if to avoid acknowledging the injustice unfolding before him. Witness after witness offered nothing more than suspicion and hearsay, yet each word was met with approving nods and murmurs from the crowd. Logic had no place here, the boy was guilty in their eyes simply because they needed him to be. When the verdict came, it was met with cheers that echoed through the small wooden building like thunder. Guilty. The word rolled off the judge's lips with a finality that seemed to crush the boy's spirit in an instant. His knees buckled, his face pale as chalk, but still no hand reached out to steady him. The mob outside had already begun preparing the gallows, their shouts and laughter seeping through the walls like poison. For Dry Creek, this was more than justice, it was spectacle, a release of tension, an excuse to unite in shared cruelty. As the boy was led out into the blinding sunlight, the rope already waiting for him, a hush fell over the crowd. For a fleeting moment, even the most hardened men seemed to falter, catching sight of his youth, his fragile frame, and the terror in his eyes. Yet the silence lasted only seconds before anger returned, sweeping away doubt like a gust of desert wind. The march from the courthouse to the gallows was short, yet it stretched endlessly in the boy's mind, each step echoing like a drumbeat of doom across the silent street. The wooden planks beneath his boots creaked under his weight, and though he was surrounded by men who sneered and spat, he felt utterly alone, swallowed by the sheer enormity of what was happening. Children peeked from behind their mothers' skirts, their wide eyes filled with a curiosity that would one day curdle into memories too dark to forget. The blacksmith leaned on his hammer, expression unreadable, while the saloon doors swung open to reveal gamblers who placed crude bets on how long the boy would last once the rope tightened. Every face in Dry Creek had gathered to watch, their thirst for blood eclipsing even the faintest flicker of compassion. In that moment, the town was united not by justice but by cruelty, a shared darkness that fed on their fear of rustlers, of strangers, of anything they could not control. The gallows loomed at the end of the street, its timbers hastily hammered together, rough rope dangling like a vulture's neck against the sky. The boy's chest heaved as he stared at it, his mind flooding with memories of home, his mother's voice calling him to supper, his father's rough hand guiding him while he learned to hitch a mule, the laughter of siblings who would never know how their brother's story ended. Those images clung to him desperately, but they could not shield him from the jeers of the crowd. Rustler. One man shouted. Thief. Another spat, though neither had seen him steal a single thing. With every insult hurled his way, his shoulders sank lower, his spirit slowly eroded under the weight of accusations he could not fight. The sheriff walked beside him, jaw clenched, sweat beading at his temples. He knew the boy was no thief, no criminal, yet he lacked the courage to stand against the tide. Fear held him back, fear of the townsfolk who might turn their rage on him, fear of losing what little order he had managed to maintain in Dry Creek. His silence was as much a sentence as the rope itself. As they reached the platform, the boy stumbled, nearly collapsing, but rough hands yanked him upright, dragging him onto the wooden boards that creaked ominously under his weight. The noose hung inches from his face, the fibers rough and frayed, and for a fleeting second he closed his eyes, as if by doing so he might will it all away. But the crowd demanded a show, and the executioner, a grizzled ranch hand pressed into service, shoved the rope around the boy's neck. Gasps rose when the boy's tears finally fell, streaking down dirt-stained cheeks, his youth laid bare for all to see. Some mothers turned their children away, yet none raised a voice to stop what was happening. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the caw of a crow circling high above. The preacher stepped forward, Bible trembling in his hands, his voice quivering as he muttered words of scripture that few truly listened to. The crowd's attention was fixed on the boy, his chest rising and falling in panicked rhythm, the rope creaking with every tremor that ran through his body. The executioner placed a hand on the lever, eyes darting nervously across the crowd, as though he too hoped someone might intervene, might call an end to this madness. But no such voice came. The town of Dry Creek, bound together by its hunger for vengeance, remained silent, their eyes hardened against pity. Even as the boy whispered words no one could hear, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a final plea, the mob leaned forward, eager for the moment of release. When the lever dropped, time seemed to fracture. The trapdoor slammed open, the rope snapped taut, and a collective gasp escaped the crowd as the boy's body jerked violently before swinging limp. For an instant, there was silence, as though the town itself held its breath. Then came the sound, boots stomping, hands clapping, voices cheering. Dry Creek roared with satisfaction, their bloodlust quenched by the sight of death. But beneath the noise, unease rippled quietly. A woman clutched her child tighter, an old man looked away in shame, and even the sheriff found himself staring at the dirt rather than the lifeless figure swaying above it. The boy had been no more than a child, yet the town had treated him as though he were the embodiment of every evil they feared. The cheering faded as the body was cut down, but the silence that followed was heavier than before. Men who had shouted the loudest now avoided one another's eyes, their bravado dissolving under the weight of what they had done. The executioner laid the boy on the ground, his face pale and peaceful, as though death had granted him the dignity life had denied. A chill swept through the crowd, for in that stillness they saw the truth: they had killed an innocent, and no amount of whiskey, prayer, or justification could wash away the stain. The preacher's hands shook so violently he dropped his Bible, its pages scattering like lost leaves across the dirt. For years to come, Dry Creek would be haunted not by rustlers or outlaws, but by the memory of that day, when a mob's anger consumed reason, and the innocent blood of a boy stained their town forever. The days that followed were eerily quiet in Dry Creek. The dust still blew down Main Street, the saloons still poured whiskey, and the ranchers still rode out at dawn, but the air carried a heaviness that refused to lift. Where once the townsfolk had boasted of their unity, now they whispered behind closed doors, avoiding the gallows that still stood like a scar at the edge of town. Children who had watched with wide eyes now woke crying in the night, their dreams haunted by the image of the boy swinging in the sun. The preacher's sermons faltered, his voice cracking under the weight of guilt, and the sheriff walked with his head bowed, each bootstep heavy with the knowledge that he had let an innocent die. Even the cattle rustling that had sparked the frenzy ceased abruptly, as though fate itself had conspired to show the town its folly. The boy was buried on the outskirts of Dry Creek, his grave marked with nothing more than a wooden cross hammered hastily into the ground. No family came to claim him, no flowers were laid in the dust, and yet the silence around that grave became deafening. Travelers passing through would pause there, staring at the simple marker, sensing without words the tragedy it represented. Slowly, the story spread, of a town so desperate for justice that it had turned on a child, hanging him without proof, condemning him for the sin of being a stranger. Dry Creek's name became a curse whispered in nearby settlements, a cautionary tale told in saloons and around campfires. No longer was it a town feared for its vigilance, it became infamous for its cruelty, remembered not for justice but for shame. The boy's innocence became immortal in death, while the town's guilt lingered like a ghost, etched forever in the pages of frontier memory.